Economists have identified a critical 8-week window. This is the estimated time global energy buffers and existing oil reserves can absorb a total blockage in the Middle East before the supply disruption triggers a definitive global downturn. The epicenter of this timeline is the Strait of Hormuz. Because global trade depends on the constant flow of energy through this narrow passage, any prolonged closure creates a backlog that the rest of the world's infrastructure isn't built to sustain. The sheer volume of energy currently trapped is staggering. With the deadlock ongoing, 35% of all global seaborne oil is effectively stranded. This lack of supply leads directly to a massive price shock. The World Bank forecasts that if the waterway remains choked off, energy prices will surge by 24% over the course of 2026. We are already seeing the initial impact in the data. International agencies have revised global growth forecasts downward from 2.8% to 2.7% as trade headwinds and geopolitical uncertainty begin to dampen exports. While 2.7% still represents growth, it is a fragile floor. If the strait remains closed past the 8-week mark, economists warn this slowing momentum will evaporate, tipping the global economy from a cooling phase into a definitive recession. Beyond just fuel, there is a severe secondary casualty of the ongoing shipping blockade: the disruption of global fertilizer trade. Fertilizer prices have already jumped 31%. This creates a delayed fuse for food inflation. As farmers reduce their usage today to save costs, the true impact hits next year. U.S. domestic impact is masked by stable labor data. This chart shows hiring cooling to 73,000 gains, with unemployment steady at 4.3%. However, look at the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index. Despite steady jobs, consumer confidence crashes to record lows as volatility reaches households. The primary driver of this panic is the price at the pump. Domestic gas prices act as a daily reminder of the global crude crisis, reacting instantly to every new development in the Middle East. These rising costs function like a psychological tax. When consumers pay more to commute, they instantly curb their spending in other sectors, effectively slowing the economy from the bottom up. The blockade in the Strait of Hormuz is breaking the psychology of the everyday consumer, rendering even a stable labor market secondary to the immediate reality of energy costs. This creates a trap for central banks. They are mandated to fight inflation, yet their primary tool, raising interest rates, simply cannot clear a physical shipping blockade or lower the global price of oil. The Federal Reserve is now watching the Personal Consumption Expenditures Index spike to 3.2%. It's a data point that suggests inflation is becoming more stubborn, not less. Over in Europe, ECB President Christine Lagarde is citing intensified inflation risks. The energy shock is weighing so heavily on economic sentiment that the bank is holding rates steady despite the risk of a slowdown. The Bank of England is facing a similar struggle, attempting to balance a spike in utility costs against the threat of secondary effects on wages. The pressure is most extreme in Japan. Deep currency volatility is forcing the Bank of Japan to reconsider its entire zero-rate policy as global rates remain higher for longer. This has created a global monetary consensus. Central banks are being forced into a high-interest rate environment to contain an inflation fire they didn't start. Policymakers are left in a trilemma, forced to keep debt costs high and domestic growth low just to offset the external pressure of the energy shock. While developed nations manage interest rates, the most severe consequences of this cascade fall on heavily indebted, low-income nations. These economies are being crushed by two opposing forces. On one side, they face record-high costs for energy imports. On the other, the global rise in interest rates makes their sovereign debt payments impossible to sustain. The IMF has issued a dire alert. This combination of high costs and rising rates is pushing dozens of developing economies toward total insolvency. This is the reality of reverse development, a state where nations can no longer afford to power their own infrastructure or invest in their citizens because all available capital is consumed by debt and energy. This catastrophic outcome is the endpoint of the 8-week ultimatum. If the choke point doesn't open, the global buffer doesn't just thin, it disappears entirely for the world's most vulnerable. When a maritime choke point remains blocked, it triggers a chain reaction that can wipe out a generation of global progress.